Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This is episode 105 of the podcast, and this week I have 8 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home, and thank you for again listening to the show. We're going to start off with telling you what those reviews are going to be. The first review is going to be the Marchstone Dale, which is the Omegaverse book 6 by G.R. Cooper. After that, it'll be a review of the Ghoulish Glitch, a LitRPG short story. Then after that, it'll be Reincarnation RPG. Now, this is actually a collection of 4 different short stories put together in a kind of omnibus, but it is being released as one thing. After that, it'll be From the Beginning, Kingdoms Reborn, book number 1. Then it'll be Aeon Chronicles Online. After that, it'll be Orc Glitch, The Mad King. Then after that, it'll be Unlucky Dad, a LitRPG adventure. And then last but not least, it'll be The Land of the Undying, Dark Elf Chronicles, book number 1. But of course, before we begin our reviews, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we just have one quick story. Friend of the show, Dakota Kraut, author of the Divine Dungeon series and the Ritualist. He was on another podcast. I know, I felt betrayed too, but it was for it's a very good announcement. Dakota Kraut has actually announced this week that he's working with a gaming company called Little Red Goblin Games to turn the Divine Dungeon series into a D20 compatible game. It's like a game company that apparently does these translations and makes their own kind of a Pathfinder and D20 game modules and game campaigns. So I'm super happy to hear that that's going to be the case. Dakota told me earlier, but he hadn't announced it, so I couldn't talk to you guys at home about this. But it was really fun. He actually went on to their Twitch channel, Little Red Goblin. We'll have a link in the show notes for you guys go watch it. But he talked to them for a little bit. There are 3 people who are on the podcast besides Dakota. Lots of good banter, lots of good talking about some LitRPG content, of course, Dakota's works, but also some general like campaign game stuff, which was beyond me. A lot of it, they're like, oh, and I feel like, oh, so is this what my wife feels like when I'm rambling or talking about something I'm passionate about? That she's just not, oh, I don't know those details, but good for you for being passionate. But it was fun to watch my friend Dakota Craig go talk to people about something he's also passionate about. And I'm looking forward to actually getting my hands on this particular thing when it is ready. But go watch the stream. It's rather entertaining. Again, I'll have a link in the show notes for you, or you can look it up at twitch.tv/Little Red Goblin. So there you go. Okay, on to some stuff that's out now. Haven't reviewed it yet, but it is out currently, including Shard Warrior. This is the Crystal Shards Online book number 2 by Rick Scott. It is out, getting some pretty good reviews. Having only been out for a couple days, so it is out. Also out is The Rescue. This is the Stork Tower book number 4, and the second book in the Pentacle series, the Arcane Transmogrifier. That is out as well. The 5th book in the Futuristic Dungeon series, The Laboratory, is out as well. That's called The Providence, is the actual title of that novel by Skylar Grant. Also out is The Accidental Duelist, a LitRPG swashbuckler, The Accidental Champion, book number 1. You might have already read their stuff, The Accidental Mage, The Accidental Warrior, and The Accidental Thief. Those are all in the same series. This is like the new kind of sub-series in the same world with the different main characters. So all those are out now, so go check those out. We have a couple of new titles out as LitRPG audiobooks. That includes The Lionheart, a LitRPG novel. The story didn't work for me, the ebook version of it, but hopefully the audiobook is better. But of course, we'll have a link in the show notes if you want to go check out our review of the ebook version. Also out as an audiobook is The District, the Futuristic Dungeon Core book number 3, called, again, The District. This is the same guy we were talking about before. In his series, he's putting up book number 5 as an ebook. He has book number 3 as an audiobook. So he's very quickly catching up on his stuff. And just last week, we reviewed book number 4. So many things coming out from Skylar Grant this month. Now, in upcoming LitRPG, this is just where I read off a bunch of titles of things that are upcoming that I know about. We do have a few new titles on this list, but you can always skip ahead if you don't want to know that information. Okay, April 4th is going to be The Betrayal. This is the Monsters, Maces, and Magic book number 2. That's right, for the rest of this month. The next 2 days, I don't have anything that I know it's coming out on those days, but the Betrayal is coming out on April the 4th. As is Killing Time is going to be out on actually April the 5th. That is the second book from CM Carney. It's in the same series as The Borrow King, but it is 4 different characters. Actually, it's called Killing Time, The Realms, Book 1.5, and he's titled it that such because it's not about the main character and that main storyline, but it is about a side character in the same universe that was introduced in Book 1. So it kind of apparently supposed to span the difference between those 2 novels between Book 1 and Book 2, which is coming out sometime in the future as well. So that is going to be out on April the 5th. On April the 10th, it'll be Absalom's Fate. And the second book in the Dominion of Blade series will be out on April the 13th. It'll be titled The Hobgoblin Ride. It's actually up for pre-order, so go check it out. Again, it'll be out on April the 13th. On April the 23rd, it'll be Countdown Rally Benders book number 1, a new series from Michael Antonoff. On the 30th of April, it'll be You're in Game book number 2. This is a short story collection put out by Magic Dome Books, the folks who do a lot of the translation from Russian into English for a lot of those authors, including Vasily Mihenko, and a bunch of other guys, including Emma Tomov, A. Levidny, other folks. All those names are on the cover of this particular short story series. The first one was kind of hit and miss for me, at least, but I'm looking forward to reading the second one as well. Some of these are going to be good. Some of them just aren't. That's always the case in a short story collection. But I definitely look forward to reading it. It'll be out again on April the 30th. On May the 10th, it'll be Mightier Still, from Enter the River VR. I always mess up that name. Side quest, Becoming Death, book number 1. On May the 10th, it'll be A Blind Gambit. And on May the 17th, World of Karnak, book number 2. And on May the 24th, God Mode, Alter Game, book number 3. On May the 27th, Kingdom Level 5. On May 28th, it'll be Trial by Fire, a LitRPG Dragon Rider Adventure, Alchemy Online Chronicles, book number 2. I like the first book. Book number 2 hopefully is going to be as good. On May the 30th, The Dead Rogue, NPC Paths, book number 1. This is a new series being translated from Russian into English, I believe by Magic Dome Books. But it'll be out again on May the 30th, and that'll be it. There you go. Those are all the stuff that I know that's coming out for the next couple months. On to new releases and reviews. Hey, and in new releases and reviews, we're going to be talking about the reviews for the 8 LitRPG titles. The first one being the Marchstone Dale Omegaverse book number 6, written by G.R. Cooper. This is 343 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. With the word of his rebellion sweeping the city, Wolfgar flees Sidonis and makes his way back to his kingdom of Marchstone. He has to prepare his defenses, raise and train an army, and ensure that the kingdom of his western flanks will ally with him in the coming war with King Clive, a war that is looming over his little alpine domain and threatens to follow him and his friends within days. Author's note, please be advised there are sexually explicit scenes within this tale that are not meant for children. Are there sexually explicit scenes that are meant for children? I don't know. I mean, all joking aside, there is actually graphic sex and gore in this novel, which is different for the series, to be honest. It happens about the 70% mark in the novel, so expect it there if you're reading this story. But both the author and myself are giving you a heads up that there is actual graphic sex and gore in this one. But it is it's not gratuitous. It is in line with the theme of the particularly evil bad guys who are doing things. So there you go. For me, if you've read this series before, Omegaverses 1 through 3 are all very sci-fi. Books 4 through now 6 at this point are all very fantasy. It's a larger, like, multi-themed universe VR world. And this world where the story is currently taking place just happens to be like this fantasy RPG stuff. So here in the series, if you like this, if you like the last couple novels in the series, you're probably going to like this one as well. If you probably already enjoy the characters. I mean, I absolutely enjoyed it. This particular part of the series adds kingdom building, city building aspects to the storyline. As Wolfgar improves his budding kingdom, he has to attract new citizens, new crafters, merchants, warriors, and build up his defenses. So there's a lot of that delegation of like materials and tasks, and even actually using a city building interface to do things. There are reintroductions of old rivals that you may remember from earlier in the series that are popping up as like mini boss villains, I guess you can say. In addition to all the new kingdom building stuff, which is mostly in the beginning of the novel, Wolfgar and his friend had to make allies with those elves, his neighbors, which talk about in the novel's description, which leads him and his friends on a quest that has some, again, graphic gore and sex as the group fights bad people doing bad things. While, again, it makes contextual sense, this is actually a very mature step for this series. Before this, I don't recall any like super graphic sex or violence. And this is just a place that the author has chosen to go, maybe to appeal to a more mature audience. I don't know, but it is definitely a more mature novel, at least in that section of the storyline. Overall, I think it's not reading the novel. Good action, very familiar game stuff. Like I said, nothing like game-wise that's introduced that's new, except for like some of the kingdom building, city building stuff. But for me, I also like the fact that it always ties back into the larger Omegaverse storyline, which is like this gradual revelation, like, oh, what the Omegaverse is, who are these like alien like guys hanging around, and what are their purpose with like humanity. And so this one also kind of ties this storyline into that larger picture as well. And hopefully something will be done with that in the near future as far as like making that an impactful part of the storyline. So for me though, it gets a score of 7 out of 10. I had a good time with it. So there we go. And that's the Marchstone Dale Omegaverse number 6 with a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, next one, A Ghoulish Glitch, a LitRPG short story by Drew Sarin. Kind of a funky cover, but there you go. Now, I don't have an exact page count for this one. I don't think it was available when I picked it up. Yeah, it's still not available. I just checked. So I'm going to guess it's about 20 pages. It's not very long. It is 99 cents. It is also available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. A mysterious glitch in a game draws players into something beyond anything they expected to experience. Darian discovers an undocumented encounter in the game he and his best friend Cal love playing and decides it would be a good way to spend a few hours before Cal leaves on his new assignment. Little do either know that the dangers that lie in wait for them as they track down the ghoulish glitch in the game. Will this really be their last quest in more ways than they can imagine? It's not, don't worry. This is, like I said, a really short story about two friends who go on one last game run together. They're trying to find a rumored special mob. There are a couple like decently written fights, but it's basically like this kind of ghost story about, this mob who doesn't really exist. So they find it, but it's a weird encounter. And as soon as midnight hits, things just kind of disappear and nobody believes they ever saw the thing. And it's okay. It's a good way to spend a couple minutes if you have time. It didn't really hit the mark for me, but I'm assuming there are a lot of other people who like these creepier stories. And this sort of hits the creepy mark, I guess. It's not really my thing, though. Again, score of 6 out of 10 for me. A Ghoulish Glitch, a LitRPG short story with a score of 6 out of 10. There you go. That's it. It's short, as is the review. Okay, next review, Reincarnation RPG by Eric Cullum. Okay, it's 266 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And again, I'll read you the author's description, then I'll get into the review. John died and is reincarnated into a world that resembles his favorite RPG. His in-game level carried over with him, and he is overpowered in this run-down world. Keeping his stats secret, he looks for a way home, but there are others, reincarnated with stats from their own games hunting him. There you go. And that's kind of a description that covers the first maybe 3, maybe 4. No, first 3 in this series. First three short stories. This is actually a short story collection that actually should be labeled as such. It's actually Reincarnation book number 1, 2, 3, and 4. With book 4, being more than half of this particular story. I've reviewed all these separately on our podcast. You can go look at our LitRPG recommendation page if you want to get individual reviews. But overall, they've been entertaining. Book one is probably the hardest one to get into because it was like book number one was written, or should I say part number one was written just as like this story idea, like to test the waters of what the community may or may not like. And it was very super rough the first time around. This time around, it's been edited. And so everything in this novel is just on a technical level, better written and cleaned up. But part one is going to be the hardest for you to get through. It's just the main character being summoned to the world. He learns he has powers of a max level game character, and he kind of deals with one boss, and that's kind of it. In part two, the main character finds a village, and you get a little more world building there. But the main character is still hiding his power because for some reason he's not sure who's hunting him, and that there are other people who may be looking for him. But he still happens to be heroish and find, help some people out, and he gets a little companion. And in book three, he actually confronts the other players in the world who are also kind of these max level game characters, but they're different from different games. So they're different powers. And that one is probably one of the better ones because it's also longer, but it also seems to have like a very coherent plot and a point to it. Book number 4 is kind of the conclusion of all of them. It is the longest of all 4. Like I said, it takes up more than half of the particular page count in this collection. And the main character is looking for a way home, but things are not easy. Not only that, he has to deal with like the main bad guy. This is really like the conclusion of it all, and it's in places in book 4, in part 4 specifically. While there's good action and good powers and stuff, it feels a little rushed occasionally, especially towards the end of it. You can tell the author's like he's trying to wrap this whole thing up, and he might have had like 5 or 6 or 7, novels or short stories in mind for the series, and he's like, okay, we're gonna squish these together a little bit just to get this whole thing done. And there's actually still room in the series for more things if he wants to do, like if this is a success. But you can tell, like overall, when you're reading this thing as a piece, that it feels very piecemeal occasionally. Like reading 1 and then 2 and 3 and 4, you're like, oh, you're like the author was kind of deciding where this thing was going as it's going. And that's fine, which is totally normal for like a serialized story. Just be aware of it when you're coming to it. Me, personally, I liked it. I really did. I've enjoyed this series, but I'm also a fan of short stories and serialized stories. And I'm okay with that kind of direction. Like, oh, I'm not really, neither the author or the reader might know where this is going, and that's okay, and that's fun. Remember, I also read this originally as it was coming out. So I'm technically I've seen it a little bit different than like someone who's finding this for the very first time. But for me, I enjoyed it. The game mechanics are interesting. I like the idea of an overpowered main character who's deciding not to conquer the world necessarily, but is kind of forced into a position of like defending other people and fighting other high level overpowered characters. And it's a very interesting concept to me. It's enough to make it enjoyable, even if like the writing technically has some issues sometimes. But I know it's not going to work for everybody. For me, I liked it. It is what it is. And it gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me, and that's for Reincarnation RPG with a score of 7 out of 10. There you go. Okay, next one. From the Beginning, Kingdoms Reborn, book number 1, written by Benjamin J. Haynes. There you go. It's supposed to be the first book in a trilogy. It is 313 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. This is the author's description. Video games are used as an escape to most, if not all, gamers in one way or another. Kingdoms Reborn was just that to Eric until he slowly became more and more frustrated with the choices of the developers. Just as he had given up on the game and was ready to walk away in search of something else to fulfill his free time, something quite odd happened. He was pulled into the world he'd once loved and adored. No longer trapped in a mediocre experience and now going by his new character named Dante, he has to overcome the changes that have affected the game world 200 years after he last played. Some of what he knew of the lore and the layouts of the land are the same, while other things have changed so drastically he barely recognizes the world around him. First task set on him by the higher beings is to take down each of the great legendary beasts who were once world bosses while growing stronger on. That's what it says. I'm not making that up, ladies and gentlemen. Go back to the description. Time seems to be on his side at the moment, but he is unaware of what enemies he will face or how different the enemies of old will be when he is forced to confront them. So there you go. So just from the novel's description, you can tell there are some technical issues with the writing here. It is not so prevalent that I really noticed it very much. They're just like, oh, pop, that's not right. And then like, oh, read it for a little while. Pop, that's not right. For the most part, it's not too big of an issue. This is a transported to a game world LitRPG where the main character is a bit overpowered. He has a bunch of fights that are decently written, but honestly, there's really no sense of danger or risk for the main character. And I think most of that has to do with the way that the game mechanics are set up, in that when he dies, he comes back immediately, like instantaneously. There's like no delay. And the most he kind of loses is like all the XP he's accumulated for that level, and possibly an item, not even like all the time either. He routinely beats world bosses that are 3 or 4 times his level. There's supposed to be like a storyline here where it's about him changing the game world, and letting NPCs dies or something. But it's really just a justification for him to go on fighting world bosses. And that's fine in itself, but it's very action oriented. And the storyline in between those action scenes is kind of thin. For me, it was just kind of a mess storyline. Like the action stuff was fine, but the pieces that tie the action scenes together have to be at least interesting enough, or at least to convey me between scenes where I care what happens. And that wasn't always the case. So like there are some points in the show like were very well written, some side stories and some in between pieces between the combat scenes, but a lot of them were just like, oh, okay, I guess we'll go with that. Overall, let's see. And overall, it was only an okay story for me. The main character also happens to be gay in the novel, if that's an issue for you. There were some reviews who are very, very voiceful that, yeah, it matters to them. But honestly, in the entire novel, there's no sex scenes. The main character just happens to like a dude, and he's a dude, and that's kind of it. But for me, the other things the story were more like impactful. But for me, the score was 5 out of 10. From the beginning, Kingdoms Reborn, book number 1, with a score of 5 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next one. It is Aeon Chronicles Online, book number 1, Devil's Deal, written by Dante Sakura. Okay, this one is 562 pages. For $4.99, pretty good price point, available on Kindle Unlimited. So there you go. I'll read you the author's description. After a deadly encounter with the forest wolf, Rowan Black survives thanks to stem cell therapy and an experimental bionic brain implant. Rowan's body recovers, but the latest treatment leaves his memories fragmented and his psyche shattered into something inhumane, irritable, and callous, and a tad bit lustful. When his doctor fails to notice this, his parents reluctantly send him back to his West Wing high school, resulting in the murder of Rowan's past bully. Rowan serves 2 years in juvenile detention in a psychiatric center, and after his 18th birthday, he is offered a choice by a powerful corporation: either spend the next decades in a psychiatric prison or play in their fully immersive virtual reality game, Aeon Chronicles Online, and grow into the role of the world's next major raid boss that players must defeat. Will Rowan regain his own psyche? How will Aeon Chronicles AI controller react to Rowan's unique mind? Will Rowan receive help in a team-oriented game, or is he alone? There you go. The author does warn that there's graphic gore, profanity, traumatizing content, plus some sexual content and romance. I don't know that there's much romance, I'll be honest, but there is actually definitely gore, violence, and sexual content. Now, okay, this novel was... I'll say it this way. You can tell that there's an Awakened Online influence in this novel. The main character, Rowan, is tortured by a bully. He has an amoral attitude that lets him make evil choices that others wouldn't. He gets a necromancer class, and he makes a deal with the dark god to create an undead city. If that sounds familiar to you, that again, that's more major plot points for the LitRPG series Awaken Online. However, those are kind of the only similarities between these two series. That's where the similarities kind of end. The rest of this novel is very different. And there are a lot of unique things about it that people tend to like or seem to like. This is a very much a darker story than even Awaken. I know that I talked to the author of that particular series, and he's like, "This is a dark story. He's evil." I'm like, maybe, I guess, but this novel is definitely dark. The main character has brain damage that is repaired with mechanical implants. The side effect being his personality shifts and he becomes a psychopath with anger issues. And in one early scene in the novel, the main character slits his classmate's throat and then stabs him in the eye. And I mean, that kind of gives you an inclination about, oh, this is definitely super graphic and dark. And some people are really loving that. When in jail, again, the main character gets the option of becoming the villain of this MMO. He's kind of blackballed into it, and he takes the offer, and there he can do all the dark, evil things he's ever wanted to, and all he has to worry about is not getting caught. And I'll admit, it's genuinely fun to read about the main character figuring out how just the right way to murder to murder his way to accomplish his goals. For me, this game stuff murder is much more palatable than the real life murdery stuff. For some reason, even though it's all text in the same book, that it's in a video game against NPCs is so much easier to take than it is, oh, this dude's like totally, oh, that's a bad thing to that person. Even though the main character is dark and he does have all these dark thoughts, that kind of storyline can be very appealing to people, and that's okay. Like I said, my particular enjoyment was like, oh, seeing how he can do those things and try to get away with it, because in the larger context of the game world, he can't just be evil for evil's sakes and nobody's going to notice. Like, there are real consequences of the game if he gets caught, including jail time, being killed, guilds going after him, all that good stuff. And there's a whole game balance portion of the novel that I thought was very interesting as well, between like the light classes and the dark classes. Those are also very very interesting. But the storyline very much does rely upon like that evil storyline within the plot scheme. And it actually does a really good job of like explaining why you should root for the evil main character as well. So overall, I like the novel. I'll admit the game mechanics are decent. There's nothing like new and special about them, but you're here for a dark storyline more than like, oh, these game mechanics. I'm not a huge fan of the power leveling that the main character gets in the storyline. He kind of goes from level, I believe, is like 6 to 41 or something at one point in like a few paragraphs because he's power leveled. But other than that, it's a good story. Plenty of dark action, some city building, conquering stuff, lots of player versus player stuff. It's very actiony. And for me, it was good enough. I'm like, I had a good time reading it. Get to score 7 out of 10. And that's going to be Aeon Chronicles Online, book number 1, Devil's Deal, with a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, next one, Ghoulish Glitch, book number 1, The Mad King, written by K.J. Harlow. This one is, again, larger as well. 538 pages, $4.40. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the novel's description. The first time Cal logged into Valor Vale, something went wrong. Unlike the human soldier everyone else got to be, he was forced to play as an orc fighter. That didn't bother him much. Not being able to exit after he logged in the second time, that was a problem. A big problem. As Cal struggled to escape the game, he realized that just like real life in Valor Vale, nothing was ever easy, especially when you were never meant to exist in the first place. And especially when an OP Archdruid decides that you would become her new plaything. That last part is a little thinner in the story. This is a Trapped in the Game novel. And the evil overlord stuff is, again, kind of a bit of a stretch in the novel's plotline. The real life portion of the story, the first 3 to 6% of the novel, is well written. It is. It's interesting. It establishes some a very interesting future modern world, and some empathy for the main character. So that's all good things that you want to have in the beginning of your story. But again, by the 6% mark in the novel, the main character is in the game, doing his thing, exploring the world, and that particular portion of it is a little bit slower, and a little awkward. I'll be honest. But if you can get past it, if you can get into it about the 11% mark, the story really does pick up its pace. It kind of finds its legs when the main character has a purpose in the story, in the game world. Up until then, it's just like, oh, this is neat. But then at the 11% mark, he kind of gets a place and a focus in which to direct his energies, and it kind of becomes this very interesting buddy adventure kind of storyline with the main character and a werepanther who doesn't particularly like him. That part of the story, again, caught my attention and kind of kept me turning pages, at least until like the larger plot was kind of unfolded in the story. The two guys don't like each other, but come to respect each other through shared hardship. And that's always an interesting storyline. It's kind of the same reason I like Turner and Hooch, in that, kind of a buddy-ish film where the antagonists at the beginning and they go through these challenges and then they become respectful and then buddies eventually. And that journey is always interesting to me, at least. It's a really good hook into, again, get to the first like story twist in the novel, which again shifts the direction of the story, but also maintains your interest. At least it did for me. There's some good fighting scenes, and a sort of a plot in the story to either leave the game world or to like get revenge for something that happens. I won't spoil what happens, but it's really just an excuse to fight, level, gain new abilities, and that's what you should expect from the novel on the most part. Like the actual like plot storyline, like it's a little one wavy, but the action and the adventure and like the buddy portions of it make up for it more than enough. The game mechanics of the story are relatively standard. Levels, stats, skill increases, item descriptions. There is an attempt in the story to bring some different concepts into it as far as like RPG mechanics go. There's this whole mechanic where like there's no sun in the world, but there are like I think 4 moons. And each has a different effect on like magic and like skills and abilities, depending on like the different compilation of their moon phases. It's a little complicated, and from it doesn't really work for me. And there's also a team combo system, like when people in groups, they can combine their powers for greater effect and some special combo moves. And it's a little bit out there because it doesn't really play into the balance of the rest of the system. It's a little overpowered, and it's used as kind of this wand wavy of like, oh, they're combining their powers for greater effect with the moons in line, and they're going to do this really awesome thing to do, to beat this bad guy. And that's what it kind of feels like. But it's a minor part of like the overall show, but it is very much used in that way. Still, it's a good attempt to try to at least bring something new to an standard RPG system. And again, the only minor complaint I have is that is the number of like magical escapes that the bad guy has. I mean, how many? I understand the need to like hold off big conflicts. The big bad guy is introduced about the 11% mark, and then he pops in and out occasionally in the storyline. And every time it's like, oh, he's almost defeated. Poof. Escapes magically, and then again and again and again. Like how many magical escapes do you need? But overall, I like the story. I really did. There's again lots of good action. The buddy stuff is really kind of the thing that drew me in. Like, oh, that's interesting. That's a good way of telling a story and introducing it into this world. And I enjoyed it. So there you go. Gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. That's the Orc Glitch, book number 1, The Mad King, with the score of 7 out of 10. So there you go. A lot of 7s this week. Okay. On to Unlucky Dead, a LitRPG adventure, Liorel Online, book number 1, written by M.B. Reed. There you go. It is 208 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Play as the undead, they said. It'll be fun, they said. When the first expansion for Liorel Online was announced, the developers declared that it would come with game-changing new features. That allure was enough to convince me and my best friend to roll up our first characters. Unfortunately for us, the game-changing feature was the trope that had first haunted the Fiverr industry for years, being trapped in a game. What was meant to be a relaxing weekend has turned into a struggle for survival. To make matters worse, we're stuck playing as the most hated race in the fantasy world, the undead. Am I lucky or what? So there you go. That is the author's description. Okay, this novel honestly has a really slow beginning, but it kind of finds itself about the 20% mark, and then it gets a lot better. There's actually a really good stream of action from that point on. So if you can get through that first 20%, I actually found a really entertaining story here. The game mechanics in this novel are different than your standard like level stats kind of thing. Everything is very equipment driven. It's a very equipment driven system with abilities being granted by equipment and talismans, which means during character creation, the main characters get to choose their race. They get to choose their kind of stat distribution. But from then on in, they don't actually get to choose like any abilities or like magic powers or anything like that. Everything is chosen either by the equipment that they're using, if it's good enough. Like for example, their shield will give you like the shield bash ability or like maybe shield rush, but a sword might give you like a slash ability that uses stamina, but you might have a staff that gives you like a magic missile effect or whatever, but it's all tied to that equipment directly. So if you change out your equipment, you're kind of changing out your build. At the same time, there are like small talismans that can be transferred from equipment to equipment, which means that you can kind of have a base skill set or base ability set that you can keep if it's something that you like. So that was at least interesting and different to me. The actual abilities you see in this novel, they seem to be pulled from a Divinity Original Sin 2. So if you've played that game, a lot of the abilities are going to seem really super familiar. And that includes the characteristics of the undead, like them being healed by poison and being hurt by healing potions, and also having like a bad reputation. And also you'll see almost the exact same skill tree of the polymorph magic skills tree from a particular game. And I thought it was interesting. I think there's enough in the game that it doesn't feel like plagiarism. It's just like, oh, I like that skill tree. I'm going to use it in my story, and it works really well in the novel as far as like being an interesting story using those mechanics. The story itself is again trapped in the game and die in the game, die in the real life. That's what kind of story it is. There's also like this very slice of life aspect to the novel until a certain point in the story. As the main character decides who he's going to be, what kind of person he's going to be in this world, if he's going to take risks, even though it might mean losing his life permanently, or if he's going to hide and hide away from the problems and hope somebody just like solves the big problem in the world that lets them all escape. And that's part of the storyline in that character development and growth for the main characters. Now there are other characters in there which aren't as important, and honestly, once the story kind of shifts away from those other people, it gets much more focused and it gets much more purposeful, much more interesting, at least to me, which is why I said after that 20% mark, it gets significantly better because it's just one person basically doing his thing, deciding what he's going to do, going on quests, going on adventures, and kind of making character arc choices. Overall, it's a pretty good first novel. Again, once you get past that slower beginning, the story really does get engaging. And yeah, I wish there were more ways to show progress, like increasing levels or stats or whatever. It's just a choice for the author not to do those things. And it is what it is. Hopefully we'll see maybe something different in the next novel. But for me, I enjoyed it still. I think it's a score of 7 out of 10. That's going to be The Unlucky Dead, a LitRPG adventure, Liorel Online book number 1 with a score of 7 out of 10. Here you go. Okay. Last one for the show. Review to rate. The Land of the Undying, Dark Elf Chronicles, book number 1, written by Dave Wilmarth. There you go. Let's see. It is, again, this one just came out as of like the recording of this particular podcast. The author says it should be about 440 pages. It is actually 140,000 words. So that should give you, a pretty good idea of like how big this is. It's $3.90, which is a spot on price tag as far as I'm concerned. Available on Kindle Unlimited as well. So no reason not to go check it out. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review on this particular story. I also did a minor amount of unpaid consulting for the author, with the authors, mostly just like brainstorming, like, oh, this is a cool idea. Oh, what do you think of this? And, read this passage and and give, feedback. And that's all I really did with it. This was a very enjoyable story. Even at that point in the very early development phase of the story, my participation was super minor. There's also maybe a character named in the story after me. There you go. Full disclosure. And again, so my review basically I forgot to read the author description. Got so involved in my own disclosure. Here's the author's description of the story. Sherry is a med student, months away from being a doctor. Mace is a coder on his first day of an exciting new job. When the world comes to a sudden horrifying end, none would have expected them to be among the few survivors. Hyper-aggressive undead creatures hunt anything living on the surface, where even the grass and trees can kill you. Hiding underground is safe, but not much of a life. Their only escape is a virtual world where Sherry can use her healing skills and Mace can focus on something other than his fears. But Sherry is a light elf, and Mace is a drow. Their people are ancient enemies and neither would be welcome in the other's world. Still, they strive to come together in the game while they scavenge for food and fight to stay alive in the real world. The odds are against them and their food will eventually run out. Is their best hope for survival to find a way to upload themselves to the game permanently? There you go. That's the novel description. To me, this was actually a great novel that combines two seemingly disparate genres, and it actually does it really well, which is honestly super hard to do. I've read a lot of stories that can't do it when they try to combine two different kind of genres, whether it's like apocalypse and thriller, and with the game world at the same time, where like the werewolf storyline and the gaming storylines have equal amounts of time in the novel. Usually it's like one is the focus and the other one kind of becomes a side story. But honestly, the author did a really good job by making them both interesting. And I think that is definitely to his credit. The real life storyline is a zombie survival story. The main character, Mace, lucked out getting into a secure facility. And even though he has like running water, electricity, and a safe place to sleep, he's alone. He's there by himself. He plays this VR game so he won't go crazy from loneliness. He also has to risk his life against monsters outside of his facility because he has to scavenge for food every couple weeks. So there definitely is that survival aspect to it, of like trying not to get murdered by the zombies, or in this case, these zombie-like creatures. The other character, Sherry, is somebody whose voice he hears over the radio at some point in the story. And together, part of the storyline is them like figuring out a way to meet up, but you also get to see her point of view as a character as well, and like how she survived in this world, and how things are different from her not having a secure place to live on a regular basis. So her survival story is a little bit more complicated, but also equally interesting and fascinating. And there's tons of like post-apocalyptic survival stuff here, and in the rural shoreline, and there's also a little bit of romance eventually between the two characters, which I thought was cute. The game storyline is mostly more your standard action adventure MMO stuff. Plenty of very interesting quest lines, but something that I think the author is really able to do that makes this, again, a particularly interesting story is that he makes the game stuff, again, relevant to the real world storyline. And I think that's very difficult for people to do. I've read a lot of stories where they try to combine like, oh, this thriller, a thriller story in the real world with like this game story, and they feel like they're written separately and they kind of mush together. And it feels like they're, it's the game stuff is almost inserted into the storyline. But with this particular novel, you can tell the author planned it from the very beginning exactly where the stories were going to connect and how they flow in and out, and it feels very purposeful. Like it's a very it's a challenging thing to do when you have like these two seemingly different genre concepts, and the author actually did like a really good job, at least in my opinion, of making them both interesting, making them both relevant to each other. And I liked it. I thought this was probably one of the better reads I've read this week. Definitely. Again, kind of connecting the stories. In the game-long storyline, the main character Mace, he wants to upload his mind to the game, giving him the possibility of living there as long as the electricity in their powered facility stays up, which means possibly centuries. So this is kind of a precursor to like, oh, he wants to upload his mind, but part of the storyline is like, oh, he has to be in sync with the game to do it. Like, so he has to play a lot, and as does the other character when she comes in the storyline, and that kind of leads into like that purpose, the reason why they have to play a game, and why like the VR gaming portion of it is there in the first place. But in addition to that, just like the excuse to like seeing the story, the game itself, again, still ties into that theme of survival, at least for the drow strand. Remember, the main character plays as a drow character or a dark elf, and so his world underground is very much about survival, and so that's I think a good point in the story that the author carried over that theme of survival in the real world to also survival in the game, at least for one of the characters, and that he's always on the run. People are always trying to murder him, so he has to try to figure out ways to survive in this kind of dark, treacherous betrayal world, even in game. But even beyond that, in addition to that, the game itself notices that all the players in this MMO have disappeared. like NPCs approach these characters and actually give them quests to say, what happened to all the players that our economy is dependent on? What happened to all these players who were used to solving our problems, and all these dangerous missions that we can't go on as NPCs because we die forever. But you players, you outworlders, have done over and over saving us. So it's a very interesting, even like game world, in that it recognizes that something in the world has shifted, and the game world is trying to adjust to that change. And I guess it's both storylines aren't independent. They're very much mixed in what they're doing. And like I said, that's kind of what makes this story, to me at least, stand above the rest. As far as like, I enjoyed it. It's a good story, but because of that particular aspect, like those storylines mixing in so wonderfully well, and knowing how hard that is, I've seen other people again try to do it before and just not successful. This did it well, at least to me, at least, and for me at least, that kind of made it a great story. I liked it a lot. I had a great time reading this. Although I'll admit, I was already partially biased. I liked the apocalypse survival genre with zombies and all that good stuff. I think it's very fascinating. You're seeing how people, hypothetically would survive in like a post-apocalyptic future, growing food, dealing with other people, zombies, monsters, whatever. I was already kind of like biased towards enjoying that a lot. And so combining that with like a LitRPG was definitely hitting my button in the first place. But for me, I had a great time with this. It gets a score of 8 out of 10. That's The Land of the Undying, Dark Earth Chronicles, book number 1, with a score of 8 out of 10. It's definitely a read recommendation if you like zombie apocalypse stuff. Combined at the same time with like this fantasy MMORPG reason to go there. It's a very interesting, cool mix to me, at least. So it gets a score up again, 8 out of 10. I had a great time with it. And that's it. We're done. Finished. That is it. I wanted to save that one for last just because I was so enthusiastic about it. And I finished reading a couple hours ago. It was kind of I had to take a break to sleep. But other than that, I read it all the way through in almost one sitting or 2 sittings. So there you go. Had a good time with it. And that's it. Thank you for listening, for watching. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Patreon. If, of course, you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can always find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, don't forget, we do need your support. We've actually lost a few Patreon subscribers recently, so we're not quite fully funded anymore. So if you can spare a buck or something to help support the podcast on Patreon, it is super useful to keep the show like free of ads, free of like sponsors or whatever else. Consider it. Otherwise, like I said, there's tons of other ways to support the podcast, including just sharing the show on Facebook or media, letting other people find us, and sharing the love of LitRPG. Those are all wonderful ways that are free to support us as well. Again, thanks for hanging out with me today. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.